All right, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of our debate series on the Too Savage for Democrats YouTube channel. And we are joined today by, of course, Brian. And we've got real Timothy Trump here as well. And we are going to be discussing net neutrality because this is an issue that's really big in the news right now. A lot of people have a lot of different positions on this issue, and we are going to try to get to the bottom of if this is a positive thing for the country, repealing it or not. So just a little bit of background here. A few days ago, the FCC voted to repeal net neutrality in a 3-2 decision, so it was very close. But they voted to repeal net neutrality, which came as a shock to a lot of the country. I mean, I've seen over 80% of the country, at least at the time of the repeal, supported net neutrality. And so they repealed it anyway because the head of the FCC is Republican, and obviously the typical Republican stance would be anti-legislation or anti-regulation on companies, but we're going to get into that a little bit today. So why don't we start off with and just kind of let Timothy offer his argument for why repealing net neutrality was a positive thing, and then we'll go from there.
Sure, yeah, I would love to. First off, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to having a discussion with you as well. I'm going to start by saying I will not be calling it net neutrality. I'm going to be calling it what it is, because there's no agreed upon definition of net neutrality, and you see it nowhere in the legislation or the U.S. government under any title.
There actually is a definition for what it is.
What's that?
There actually is a definition.
No, I said agreed upon definition. Agreed upon. So a concise agreed upon definition, one person's interpretation of net neutrality. It was coined by a professor. I don't know what year. It was coined by a law professor, and it makes it sound like this great utopian thing, and that's fine. But there's no agreed upon definition of what net neutrality is. People call it the open internet, which is why in 2015 it was a 2015 open internet order. So I'm not going to call it net neutrality. I will call it what it is, 2015 open internet order, which, if you want to dive a little deeper and digest that, it's essentially socialism on the internet, or socialized internet, in my humble opinion, and hopefully in the opinion of...
Can I ask how you define socialism?
Well, socialism is a social class. It's a class kind of warfare where everything is equal and everything must be equal, and there's no one person or entity benefiting more so than another. So under that premise, under my definition of what I view socialism is, as the 2015 Open Internet Order is precisely, a glaring image.
Let me ask you this.
So I also think we should talk a little bit about definition. Maybe Dylan disagrees with me, but my understanding is net neutrality is all data that you buy is treated equally. Do you agree with that, Dylan?
Yeah, and well, I did want to start here, just going to ask Timothy a question, because he said that socialism is everybody is inherently equal, right? I think that's what a lot of socialists push. They say, oh, know what, everyone's inherent. Let's try to make everybody equal at the outcome. But I think when I look at net neutrality, what I think of it is as, these ISPs, service providers, rather than just automatically saying it's equal, what's happening is that they're saying, turn down your volume a little bit, Timothy. I'm echoing through.
Yeah, I'm turning my volume down a little bit there.
Okay, so instead of saying everyone's equal, it's saying, okay, you should treat all companies equally that want to use your if you want to purchase a certain amount of megabits per second or whatever, you should use that. You should treat all of them equally. So it's different than, it's kind of like saying if I walk into a restaurant and I want to get a cake baked for me and I'm gay, right? I should be able to get that cake just like a Christian should be able to walk in a Muslim shop, but you could deny it. But it's completely different, because when you say when you're talking about cake, it's a different issue than the internet. But it's essentially saying we need to treat all people, all ISPs need to treat all companies equally to give the free market a chance.
And with socialism, with the communal, with socialism being essentially communal ownership of the means of production, sometimes by government, mostly by government. One of the big issues with that is they have things such as, price control, right? And because of that, we see massive demands increase, and we see shortages, and we see people starving to death. To where this is simply saying, if we look at internet providing services, there's not a lot of them. There's very few. Where most people live, they only have one or two. And actually, it hinders the marketplace, because companies can slow down their competition. We saw that happen to Netflix. I think it's actually going to make it harder for more internet providing services to come through and offer their services to the marketplace.
Okay, so can you guys hear me, by the way?
Yeah,
Yes.
it's not using that mic, but we can hear you.
Okay, that's fine. So you bring up Netflix, and what's interesting about Netflix is a lot of people pinpoint that Comcast and Netflix as to the reason why the open internet order was enacted. Obama cited it. Multiple people who I talked to cited. The funny thing about it is, contrary to popular belief, the drop in speeds wasn't an issue of the ISP throttling or blocking service to Netflix. Rather, the ISPs were allowing for Netflix traffic to bottleneck as what is known as peer ports. Okay, so, and I'm getting this information from consumers.com, so I'm going to cite my sources here, which I think everyone should do. The connection between Netflix's bandwidth provider and the ISP is what's known as a peering port. Until recently, if peering ports became congested with downstream traffic, it was common practice for an ISP to temporarily open up new ports to maintain the flow of data. This was not a business arrangement, just something that had been done as a courtesy. ISPs would expect the bandwidth companies to do the same if there was a spike in upstream traffic. However, there's virtually no upstream traffic with Netflix, so Comcast and Verizon's of the world claim they were being taken advantage of. The beautiful thing. Well, let me finish. But let me finish real quick.
Well, do you
the beautiful thing about it, absolutely, 100%. They didn't throttle them at all. They didn't throttle them at the peer ports. There's bottleneck because there's so much demand for Netflix, and Comcast is giving. There's no upstream. There's virtually no upstream. It's all downstream. So Comcast is having to go to the peer ports and open up additional peer ports for these people who are consuming so much bandwidth and data. I mean, right? Comcast only has a certain amount. So here, the FCC didn't cite that. If you're going to say the FCC cited that, they didn't.
They did.
So let me ask you this then, if you want to bring in the FCC citing it from two.
Can I ask my follow-up question just really quick?
Of course, absolutely.
They actually hit it.
The initial point you made.
That's another reason they got in trouble.
Yeah,
that's why they hit it.
So yeah, no, they
Netflix
did hide it.
A bunch of money.
Because what happened was that Comcast users only. So you'd think that this is a big issue. Other companies, other ISP. I know there's only like 5 or 6 ISPs. And by the way, it's shrinking now. I mean, there's mergers between the companies. At the end of 2019, there's going to be 3 ISPs, major ISPs to choose from. It's going to be insane. And it's just pretty much essentially a duopoly between these companies because they just work together. But Comcast users were noticing a drop in streaming speed from Netflix, and they started filing complaints. And Netflix came out and said, yeah, we had to pay Comcast money to be able to receive this kind of equal usage from the ISP. They had to pay the ISP an extra amount of money per month, which in turn would cause the prices for Netflix consumers to increase, right?
And the only reason we even found that out is because of a lawyer, I believe his name was Travis Scott. Yeah. They're able to actually break through and see that they were hiding a lot of those things because they claimed they didn't throttle.
They never hid it. And first off, it wasn't just Comcast; it was Verizon as well. It was Cox as well. There was multiple companies. Netflix and Comcast never hid it from anyone. Netflix and Comcast in the free market, February 23rd, 2014, came to a mutual agreement because that's what the free market does. They say we have an issue. It's not like Comcast held them captive. There was a standoff.
Well, no. There's a difference between keeping something a secret and not telling people, right? Like
it wasn't a secret. It was published in February 23rd of 2014. Comcast and Netflix mutually agreed upon something to make the consumer's experience better. Meanwhile, mutually benefiting.
It was fine before is the thing. It was fine before the speed.
It wasn't fine before because there wasn't as many users on Netflix before. There's so many different variables.
All that money?
Yeah, but when you to stream
they didn't have to cough up money. No, they didn't have to cough up any money. They came to a mutual agreement, which is what businesses do. When Netflix is charging people a fee to use their service, and the ISPs are you go into your internet service provider, you pay to have internet. If you didn't want to use Netflix, you pay Netflix a monthly subscription rate. If there are hundreds of millions of Netflix users and they're taking up 90% of the bandwidth, it shouldn't be the burden. It shouldn't be the burden of the internet service provider to cough up their money to allow a better streaming service for their service.
Here's the issue.
Netflix should be responsible for that.
So if I pay for 50 megabytes per second, right? Streaming a Netflix movie is less than 10 megabytes per second.
And Netflix is already
if I pay for 50 megabytes, does it matter how much I'm using for my Netflix show? See, that's the issue here. Is I've paid my internet service provider for 50 megabytes.
And Netflix paid theirs as well. The problem
They're
is
paying
getting
that
it
as
to
well.
the
So why was
consumers.
why with the customers of Comcast and all these other ISPs, why
And
were they getting slower service when they have already paid for the certain amount of megabytes per
I want
second?
to make
Because it was bottlenecking at what is known as peering ports. That's Netflix bandwidth providers, not the ISP. That's Netflix's chosen bandwidth provider. There's only so much that can stream through. You have to start opening up more ports. It
But why
shouldn't
is that
be the
Netflix
burden
fault?
of, it shouldn't be the, because Netflix is the
Netflix
streaming
paid for their
service.
share
Netflix
too.
should not, they didn't pay enough to allow for a
Yes, they
good
did.
consumer experience. Well, how do you define enough? You define enough as the ISPs are multi-billion-dollar companies, so they should just spend a bunch of money, and Netflix shouldn't have to pay for anything.
No, that's the
Netflix
issue
paid
here.
for
Is that
theirs.
there's
That's
no
the problem. They
incentive.
did.
There's no
Netflix
They
incentive
did
for
pay
the
for theirs because it goes
ISPs.
from Netflix to the ISPS, and then it goes from them to the consumer. Netflix paid their part. The consumer paid their part. It's now the obligation for companies to deliver on what they promised on.
Exactly, and Netflix should deliver upon what they promised their
They did.
consumer. They
But
didn't.
Netflix
They didn't
did.
pay their fair share.
Where does it go
can't
from
say-
Netflix? Do you think it goes right from Netflix to the consumer? Because that's not how
Of course
it
not.
works.
Of course not. It goes from the, what is it called? I know in London it's called the links, the London Internet Network
It's
System.
called
And you
a
have
Title I.
No, it's not going
Yeah.
from Netflix to links. When you look at the internet as a whole, what the internet is, you have tiers, you have different things. You have 12 tier ones, that's the backbone of the internet. Then you'll have tier twos, tier threes. It doesn't just start and go directly from you to the
But
consumer.
where's-
Eventually it gets to the consumer. I don't know
where's
the
the clogging
exact
occurring?
statistics of so when you're demanding so much service, there's only so much an ISP can do. They're doing Netflix a service by opening peer ports, opening more peer ports. And Netflix says, well, we shouldn't have to pay more. We pay this price and, we have this. Here's what's funny. People don't find it, wrong on Netflix to charge them a monthly fee, raise their monthly fee prior to Comcast, this whole issue with Comcast. Netflix raised their fees prior to that. There was no issue there. The only issue is that people look at these big evil corporations and they call them that, when in all actuality, that's not really what they are. We want to talk about duopolies and being afraid of there's only going to be 3 ISPs. And I find it funny that the way you want to combat that is give regulation to the biggest monopoly, the U.S. government.
No, but the issue. No. Okay,
Can I bring a point up in a second?
Talk
There's
about
a few
library.
things I want to address.
Please, let's talk about everything else.
Well, no. You're misinterpreting the entire problem. I'm not giving power to the government. I'm taking power away because essentially the reason that communism doesn't work is because the government is the source for everything. It's the same kind of issue. And here's the problem as well.
Not only that,
let's take Netflix out of the equation for a second. All right, fine. Netflix paid the extra money. They made the deal. They could afford to pay the extra. Well, okay, hold on, Brian. Hold on. Netflix could afford to pay the extra money. But let's say that Brian starts a company, a streaming service to compete with Netflix. What if he can't afford to pay that money to Comcast? So they're like, all right, well, screw you. We're just going to go with Netflix. Screw your small business. Is that hurting the free market or is that helping the free market?
and also, what about Madison River Communication or AT&T throttling FaceTime? They were throttling their competition. You're hurting competition. And when you hurt competition, companies are able to prevent other competing companies from occurring. And that's really the big issue, and they're dying off now.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You guys want to ask me a bunch of questions. Let me ask you guys a question.
No, hey, please answer my. No, wait. I do want you to. It's a yes or no answer. Do you think that it hurts the free market if a small business were to come along and say, "I want to provide a streaming service to consumers," and Comcast were to say, "Well, here's a copious amount of money that you have to pay to me every month to do that"? They say,
or we throttle you.
Absolutely hurtful to smaller ISPs and smaller streaming services that want to come about that are regulated by the government, dictating everything has to be equal, which is why we've seen a 5.6%.
No, it's just saying that here's the thing: you have to charge everybody the same amount. You can't say, "Oh, this person has to pay more than this person because I like this streaming service."
It's not about that at all. It's
absolutely about that. It's not about us having to pay for tweets, which is misinterpreted to the fullest extent. It's about these companies who want to compete that aren't going to be able to anymore because Comcast prefers Netflix. Or another example. Let's say that Comcast releases a competitor themselves to Netflix. Then they say, "Oh, you know what? Netflix can't even run on this anymore unless they pay even more money."
Okay, so
these smaller companies.
That's a hypothetical what-if scenario. Show me an instance and where that happened.
Well, sure, it's a hypothetical debate we're having.
It's not a hypothetical debate. The facts and figures.
It is, because these regulations have been in.
My stance. So
what if I said, okay, no, here's a hypothetical. Here's a hypothetical right here.
The facts and figures are this. Here's the facts and figures. Since from 2014 to 2016, we've seen a decrease in the ISP's capital expenditures investing in infrastructure and technology to the tune of 5.6%. In dollars, that translates to 3.6
Okay,
billion.
you just picked a regulation, though. You just picked when we had a recession. That's to be expected. You're taking data and saying it's going to fit your argument. There's other factors.
And numbers from the time that the open internet order was implemented until today.
Okay, well, two things. Number one, you realize we had things very similar to net neutrality. There's two things going on. First off, you realize we had other regulations just like net neutrality that was in place before, right?
Which one?
And that didn't impact it. And number two, you're picking.
Tell me which regulation, because I know exactly which one you're talking about, and you're wrong.
There's been tons. We've had fines that go all the way back to early 2004. Okay, what about the River Madison communication? That was back in 2004.
Back in 2004 with AT&T and FaceTime, right? That's what you're talking about?
I'm talking about the Madison River communication that happened in 2004. That was prior because we
they were charged $15,000 for restricting consumers' access to Vonage. That was rivaling their own services. They were charged money from the United
States. Under the 2015 open internet order, that would have been illegal. Listen. I know it's prior to 2015. It's 2004. Under the current laws and regulations, that is illegal, right? That's what open internet orders is meant to protect. Now, you tell me, that's one instance. How many instances are there that under the 2015 open internet order would have been illegal? Tell me how many instances.
If it's already illegal, how would they have done it?
No, listen. It happened prior to the open internet order.
Yeah, but listen. In 2004, hold on a minute. In 2004, there was not the problem. The issue is that now the whole system is changing. Nobody's watching cable anymore. Nobody's watching these other companies. So companies like Comcast, AT&T, versus all these other companies, they are having direct competition from sources like Netflix, and now they have a reason to, for example, release their own services against Netflix and restrict users' things to Netflix. Back in 2004, Netflix wasn't that big, so there was no reason for consumers to be afraid of things like Netflix, Hulu, YouTube, and things like that. But now people are concerned about that because the cable is dying. Cable is 100% dying. Trump talks about it all the time. Hold on, wait, I wasn't done yet. Cable is dying, right? Okay. So let's say, okay, Comcast, I'm Comcast, right? I'm sitting here. Oh, look, nobody's watching cable anymore, but look, Netflix is very successful. I'm going to release my own company now. I'm going to release my own streaming service now through Comcast. Now Netflix a ton of money to keep streaming through my ISP, and I'm going to charge them a ton of money. And they'll get better quality from my competitor, and they're doing that on purpose because now they have the incentive to do that, whereas in 2004 they didn't. So we're going to start seeing things like that now because the market is changing so much.
No, we're not.
You can't just say no. Is it evolving? Do you agree it evolves?
I see an example of that happening. So
I can't provide you. It just ended. We haven't even gotten rid of it yet, so I can't provide you.
Yeah, I mean, Congress can go.
Apocalyptic. What a scenario that you have
no. That's like saying if I legalized marijuana countrywide, that more people would smoke weed. I can't prove that, but it's true.
No.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is.
No. Absolutely not.
The thing is, you can't still not even go through. Congress could block it.
What if scenario that you have no evidence to back the claim? You guys keep citing these Madison.
I just gave you several. And the problem is, of course, it's
you gave me an example of something that would have been illegal under.
Let me ask you a question.
Order. How many instances? Ask me a question when you answer mine. How many instances has there been?
I already answered your question. The market is changing. The market is completely different.
How many instances?
I want to ask a question real quick because I think
would a company doing something been illegal under the current law? Tell me how many instances. You can't.
We've already cited you in this debate. We cited Netflix.
Can I say something real quick?
So there's been 12 instances from 2004 to 2015. Now I want you to put that in perspective of how many times.
Can I say something real quick because there's I think an issue here.
Streaming services. How many billions of hits the internet gets a day? There's 12 instances of that happening. That's 0.0001% of your internet use.
Timothy,
where open internet order would have protected you. That does not mean.
Timothy,
dude, but that's oh my god.
Timothy, what kind of answers do you expect us? Do you not expect hypothetical in a situation that does not exist yet?
Because we've had an instance of this happening from 2002 to 2015.
Yes.
Yes. Under the 1996 Telecommunications Act, the internet was regulated. In 2002, the FCC declared that the internet was not a telecom industry and it was an information provider. So from
we had regulations in from those places.
The FCC, not FCC, is under
Timothy.
jurisdiction to see if something's wrong or not. And the FTC does a hell of a lot better job and has way more power than the
We've
FCC
had
does.
cases all the way back into 2004 and prior of these things happening.
12.
So we did have these things going in.
12.
There's been several cases, and those are the ones we know
there was
of.
an incentive from the companies. Now there's an incentive from the companies. The market is changing drastically.
It's not 2004 anymore. Netflix isn't delivering stuff via the mail.
Mm-hmm.
You have to acknowledge the marketplace changes.
The marketplace did change. Prior to 2015, we saw MySpace, we saw Facebook, we saw Snapchat,
Those were not where they were now. They were not what they are now.
MySpace, are you kidding me? MySpace died. And
Google
why did
still dominated?
I'm old enough to remember when there was no Facebook and MySpace was the thing. Everyone had a MySpace. And I don't recall one instance of having to pay for MySpace prior to having it been free.
We're not making that argument.
Services on MySpace you absolutely had to pay for. If you wanted to get a customized themed background, you had to pay for it on MySpace. There were services that you had to pay for on MySpace. To say that there weren't services you had to pay for is completely asinine because they're
it's not asinine because I never had to pay to use a customized background. You know why I didn't have to? Because there was open source sites and companies that say, hey guys, use this code. We're going to give you, make your background this, put freaking GIFs and flying cats through your shit. So so what is that an example of? The free market. So
but you're anti-free market right now because you're a Trump supporter. You're supposed to be against big companies having control of everything, which is exactly what happened with the repealing of net neutrality. I guarantee you right now, these companies, because what is the incentive for the small businessman? What is the incentive for the small businessman to repeal net neutrality? There is none. All right. It's like if you have a highway and everybody has to travel down the highway at the same speed. Well, now the net neutrality is, and again, I can't say what's going to happen. I agree with you. We don't know what's going to happen yet. I can't say that. What I can say is what they are allowed to do.
And if you look at it like a highway,
these massive ISPs, of which there are only 3, are now allowed to say, all right, well, we are going to allow these services to move down the highway faster while the rest of them can't. That is fair to the small business.
I also want to make a point.
ISPs, there's not 3, just to let you know.
I want to make a point real quick. Well, it depends on your location.
It depends on your location. For example, in my location, we have Spectrum and we have Comcast. Now we have Google Fiber, which, by the way, Google Fiber was for people saying that net neutrality harmed more company. Google Fiber was released during net neutrality's reign. So it obviously didn't hurt that much if Google Fiber is released. And
there's a reason that Google is for the open internet order. I'll let you know that.
I just want to make a point that to say that that's the market working, you can't compare something that has a monopoly to everything else we see in the marketplace. I would agree that in most instances it's not needed. But when you're dealing with something like the internet where it's inherently monopolistic, there is a need for some sort of regulations to ensure that you can get other companies in. It's very easy to prohibit your competition through packaging. And it's very easy to throttle these slower.
So why do you only have one? Why do you think you only have one internet service provider?
No, I'm not saying only have one. I'm saying each. If you look at
Brian, why you said you have one? Why do you think that you only have one? Because you live in a small town
and there's not a demand right now.
Who do you blame for that?
Local city for not developing the town into a bigger city.
Local city and local governments, because they're choking the broadband competition. So it's humorous to me.
That's not what I said at all. You're strawmanning me completely. It's because they rejected things like Amazon from coming in. And that obviously destroys potential jobs. It has nothing to do with net neutrality whatsoever.
Yes, it does, because they're choking broadband competition. And then the market, you can laugh all you want, but listen, everyone wants to say
you're strawmanning me.
I only have one, or I only have 2.
I live in the area where Google Fiber. Listen,
are you two going to yell over me every time I try to make a point?
You've been talking.
You're strawmanning me.
Listen,
I never said.
I live in the area where Google Fiber was tested. I live in Kansas City was the area where Google Fiber was tested and first released. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
City metro area, very large. I only have access to 2 or 3. All right, Comcast and Time Warner Cable. That's it. Like you have DirecTV, get up with your stupid satellite and put it on the roof. But it's like there's really nothing competing, and they're merging now with Spectrum. Time Warner Cable now merged in their Spectrum now, so there's even one less. But it's completely depending upon the area that you live in, and this happens all over the place, there are less and less. Now, everybody in the country can't move to New York City or move to Los Angeles. You know why these
companies? Like if you had one Walmart.
Do you know why Kansas City was chosen for Google Fiber? Do you know why it was implemented so quickly?
Let me finish my point, please. These companies have been given hundreds of billion, and you can't dispute this, hundreds of billions of dollars from the government, these internet service providers, hundreds of billions of dollars. They have not followed through on the promises that they had to make for being given that money. Now, the reason that they go to places like LA and like the big cities, the big metropolitan areas where there's more, is because they want to make more money. They don't care about the small guy, which is the entire point I'm making right now. They're not going to go to buttfuck Missouri because they don't care about buttfuck Missouri's people because they can't make any money, while they're also being given hundreds of billions of dollars from the United States government. And if they're already being selfish and hogging money like this, what makes you think that when we repeal net neutrality and allow them to be even more selfish and hog even more money and suppress competition, what makes you think they're not going to do that?
Opening the
crony capitalism.
Competition. Opening the free market does not suppress competition. It encourages.
It does in this case. It absolutely does, because you're giving
local governments wanted Google Fiber more than they wanted kickbacks. So they expedited the permitting process, gave Google rights of way access for little to no cost, and allowed Google to build out selectively in neighborhoods where consumers actually express demand. It also helped that these local governments had less leverage because the states of Kansas, Missouri, and Texas had streamlined video franchising laws, so a provider need only get one license for the entire state. It's clear that investment flows.
That's not neutrality. That isn't net neutrality, though.
It's clear that investment flows in areas less affected by regulation than areas that are dominated by it. Observe Milo Medin, Google's vice president of access services, in summarizing the lessons of Google's Kansas City experience in congressional testimony. When even well-established companies like Google are deterred by such barriers to entry, is it really surprising that there are more competitors jumping into the broadband market? As Medin pointed out, just imagine the impact on small and medium-sized enterprises. So what everyone wants to say is that, oh, this is not
regulations, though.
These are local government orders and regulations that are choking broadband competition.
We're not talking about all regulations.
If I finish a point, if I can, I don't know if I'm going to be able to this evening because I have two people who maybe disagree with me, and that's okay. But every time I go to make a point, you cut me off, and then it's extremely relative because we want to open free market competition. Yes, it is. If you let me finish a statement, then you might be able to learn something instead of sitting here and trying to voice over me every 5 seconds. I mean, if you want to have a discussion, we can have a discussion.
Don't understand. That's great, but
you don't understand what you're talking about here. Listen, government regulation does not work. We do not need the government regulating anything. We need free market, open competition. And we saw the internet from 2002 to 2015. Okay, so there's no point having a discussion with you. You are absolutely unable to have an open-minded discussion with someone.
No, you just
there you are. I'm serious. I'm trying to be so respectful here. And every 2 seconds, all I hear is this guy saying, "Oh, you're blanketed. You're not doing this. You're not doing this. This is ridiculous." If you want to have a conversation, your only argument for your net neutrality is a hypothetical apocalyptic what-if scenario.
No,
I have presented facts and figures and actually confirm my belief.
Let's let him finish his point that he's made that has nothing to do with net neutrality. Let's let him finish it, and then we can just
there's a lot of misinformation being spewed there. So once he's done, I have a few things I need to respond
to. You're very misinformed, so go ahead and spew your misinformation.
2 things. Number 1, you're blanketing the term regulation. You're just saying regulation in general is bad. That's a very dogmatic view on the world. Why is it bad? That's my question. So in regards to that,
can I answer your question?
Yeah.
You want me to answer your question?
Regulation bad. Regulations hurt. I understand that, but this is a very different scenario than your typical, market. Irrelevant.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is. Dude, in 1996.
No, it's not relevant.
Technology explodes so quickly. We're going to be rolling out
why would you
in a year. When you start regulating technology and innovation and entrepreneurship,
we're not. Dude, these companies are already supersized. There's no reason. In 1996, we gave
the people that this is being regulated against are the companies.
Okay, yeah, in the 1996 Telecom Act, we gave billions of dollars in subsidies, right, to the ISPs to upgrade infrastructure. They have not done it. The reason that nothing has changed, they are not following up their end of the bargain at all.
And just to clarify, the reason why it's different is because if you deal with a situation that doesn't have a monopoly or what's essentially a monopoly, then I agree. You really don't need regulations because businesses essentially regulate themselves. But when
So you want to
areas
fix
that
a
only have
monopoly with a
one-
monopoly? Okay.
So do you think
What'd you say?
that
let me
we
respond
should
to what
get
he
rid
said,
of
'cause
all do you think then that we should get rid of all monopoly laws and just allow all companies to have monopoly? Should we only have one Walmart, no Targets, no other consumer, no other grocery stores, just
Well,
Walmart? That way they can set
if
their
we
price
had
on their
just
own.
Walmart, you would need regulation, but we don't need regulation because you have a lot of other grocery stores to go
Yeah,
to.
but the reason that
That's
we
not
have
the
the other
case with
grocery stores,
IPSs.
the reason that we have other grocery stores and other stores is because of anti-monopoly
It's
law.
different than technology.
Yeah,
that,
no, but
and
I'm
it's
saying,
different
we have
from
because
the
of
internet.
these laws, like monopoly laws. You're not allowed to have monopoly in the United States, but these companies are very close. And what you're essentially wanting is that all of these companies essentially create a duopoly where they can just merge together and find the loopholes in the law that are already there. What net neutrality is closing a loophole in a law. That's essentially what it was doing.
And it's easy for another business to come along and start like another food area. It's not the same to provide internet service to people, at least at this point in time.
Yeah, it's not
It's
very
like with
easy to
NASA. I
set up an
generally like the
ISP.
private.
I could not come
I
to some
generally
store
like
with
the
an
private.
and compete with Time Warner Cable, or compete with Spectrum and compete with Comcast. I couldn't do it at this point, and I especially
And
won't be able
especially
to
not
do
if they throttle you.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, it's like with NASA. Generally, I think the private sector should handle areas. But at this time, the private sector is not going to be able to, go into space. It's not going to be able to go to the moon or take, all those cool stuff. That's why funding NASA is important. It's kind of the same thing. Right now, when you have a monopoly in a particular area of the market, then you do need some regulations until other companies come through.
Okay, so a private company has sent a rocket into space. What space?
Off NASA funding.
Yeah, off NASA funding.
NASA gives them
NASA had to do it. At first, NASA had to find the equation to reach escape velocity and all of that. I mean, private companies, even Elon Musk admits it would not have been possible without funding.
And that's the owner of the place.
Okay. So aside from rockets into space, let's get back to the internet.
I gave an example.
Why we don't need the FCC to regulate anything when it comes to what we're discussing. We do not need regulation because the power of the free market always prevails. Okay.
Not in monopoly areas. That's the point.
Well, here, Brian, let's let him finish.
Listen. All right. You keep saying not in monopoly areas, and your solution to a monopoly is to give regulation and oversight to the biggest monopoly, the United States government.
What's wrong with that?
Your problem with the monopoly is your solution to a problem of a monopoly is to give oversight and regulation to another monopoly.
It's different because the government is not an internet service provider. If the government was an internet service provider and I was saying, well, let's give that internet service provider more power, then I could see the issue. But I'm not doing that. Let's say that we have, the USPS and then UPS, like the two competing, there's the private sector package delivery service and then there's the United States Postal Service, right? Everyone knows that. If I were to say, oh, let's give more power to the United States government to do that, that would be unfair to the private companies. That's not what Brian's saying. What he's saying is let's let the independent government, because they're not an ISP. There's no reason for them to regulate unfairly because they are not an ISP. They're not creating a competitive ISP to the free market. So what he's saying is let's give them the ability to regulate the ISPs so that they handle themselves fairly in the free market. The government is not an ISP. So it's not, we're not giving the largest monopoly because they're not monopolizing the ISP market. The ISP companies are monopolizing the ISP market. So it's wrong what you're saying.
No, well, I'm more respectful.
On healthcare, and you want to compare it to Obamacare, giving power to the government, that is giving them a monopoly because the government can provide healthcare. So when we say, oh, let's give all the power to the government, that's a problem. We should let the private sector handle that, maybe with some regulation from the government in terms of like pre-existing conditions and things like that. But we shouldn't allow the government to create a monopoly on healthcare. But the government can't create a monopoly on internet service providing because they don't provide internet services. And that's not what net neutrality is asking them to do. It's just saying, don't allow these companies that are already providing internet services to, number one, throttle other companies from starting up and competing because that's unfair to the free market. If we really truly want a free market, other services have to compete freely. And number two, not allow them to duopolize and completely control the entirety of the market. It's not fair.
It would be like if a big business, like if you had a bunch of plumbing companies and the big businesses went in, poked air out of the other one's tires and slowed down the other businesses and made it harder for them. That's what we're trying to prevent.
Yeah. Okay, and so repealing the 2015 Open Internet Order, what it does,
you can't do that.
No, let me ask you this: is there still oversight and transparency once the open internet order is repealed.
Okay, they're saying that now you have to be transparent, but what does that mean? What does that mean? Transparency, that's a funny word because remember,
this includes network management practice. Okay, this is what it means. Under the new proposal, internet service providers or ISPs have to disclose information about their practices to consumers, entrepreneurs, and the commission. This includes network management. I can't get a word. I mean, what am I doing here besides just getting yelled at? I mean, it's okay to yell at me, but at least let me respond. This isn't a discussion.
Cut in and out because of my Wi-Fi. Well, my Wi-Fi is being cut in and out, so it cuts, and I think you're done. So then I start, and then I hear it catches up.
So
continue.
Net neutrality.
That's why we need it.
No, that's why we need to get rid of it because we still have it right now. Your Wi-Fi is cutting in and out because we want another company to come in with new technology and give it to you.
Explain the situation in my town.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so you blame the local government, not the big evil bad corporations.
Because they stopped Amazon. I think I know more about my economy than you claim to do. So yeah.
Well, you very well, but you're making yourself ignorant when I respond to that and you say that's completely irrelevant to the subject. No, it's
not really seeing how I actually know about my economy.
Your local government township said, no, we don't want you. We'd rather have this guy. That's not Amazon. That's the local government's fault. So blame the local government. When you only have one provider, don't look at it. Help me.
If you want to talk about being ignorant, that's you talking about my economy that I live in. The reason why the economy isn't good here is because you just did. You said that's why we need it.
I'm saying
you can rewatch the debate. You said
government. I will rewatch the debate. Well, it's not much of a debate. It's just you yelling all the time. But anyway,
you're not yelling at all.
I'm not yelling. I'm staying very calm. I have people in the house. It's you being very emotional over this.
No, I'm not being emotional. Here's the thing. You invite me on to have a discussion. Okay, keep chuckling. That's okay. That makes you look very calm. So you invite me on to have a discussion. Great. That's good to know. I'm very happy to know that. So you invite me on to have a discussion. The entire time you ask me a question, I start to answer. I have you and Dylan both start coming at asking me 15 other questions. Then you call me irrelevant. Then you say what I'm saying doesn't matter. I can't finish a damn point with you because I can't get over you and your little chuckles.
How about this?
I mean, you don't know how to have a discussion. I understand you want to be emotional about it because your local government and the local economy
very calm.
Screwed you over, not me.
It's you, the one yelling.
This is not
you're the one yelling. I'm staying.
You haven't heard me yelling. You can't have a discussion. You don't know how to have a discussion.
I'm not the one yelling.
This is a discussion. What's happening right now is you're getting destroyed, and so you're reading notes that you're pre-written. So it's like nobody can understand what you're saying because you're saying 27 different things at once, and we're trying to cover.
And when we've heard that argument 20 times,
first off, I'm not getting destroyed. Put the notes aside. Your guys' argument for your net neutrality is a hypothetical, apocalyptic, what-if scenario that you have.
Yeah, because it's not repealed.
You have absolutely none. What I'm asking for, let me finish. I mean, good Lord, dude, do you have to say something every 10 seconds? Keep your mouth.
No, you're wrong.
Let me make a point. It's okay for you to think I'm wrong, but if you're having a debate and a discussion, you let the other person finish, like I've let you done.
You're using a Nirvana fallacy.
Brian, let's
let him finish. Or not.
You're making yourself look like an ass, Brian. You really are, and I feel really bad.
I'm not the one using a Nirvana fallacy.
Here, let's let him finish.
I didn't know if you
let's let him finish his point. Let's let him finish his point.
Okay, so your argument for net neutrality, respectfully, here's the thing. I completely understand and respect your concerns, right? However, what I'm saying is it's a hypothetical, apocalyptic, what-if scenario that has no tangible evidence to back the claim. What I'm presenting and a proponent of—
flat earther.
Okay, now we're going to bring in something that's completely irrelevant to the discussion.
Can I respond to your criticism, please?
Sure, go ahead. I'll just stop making my point and let you respond to my criticism.
Well, you made the criticism. I let you finish. And basically what you're—
but that's okay. Go ahead.
Well, you did respond with your criticism. You said basically you're using what's called a Nirvana fallacy. Are you familiar with that?
No, I'm not. Enlighten me.
Basically, it's when you set up a scenario where no matter what for example, creationists do this a lot. They're like, well, we can't see it happen. Well, yeah, because it takes millions upon millions of years. We don't know exactly what's going to happen because it hasn't gone through yet. It's still got to go through Congress. So what exactly do you expect in terms of arguments?
What I expect in terms of arguments is look at from when the open internet order was enacted until when it was repealed. Let's look at the data. The data states that they have lost 5.6% of capital expenditures. Okay, that's investment money to build infrastructure and new technology to the tune of $3.6 billion. That's harmful. That hurts consumers. By ending the FCC regulating the internet, okay, and ISPs, you reopen the transparency and oversight to the FTC. The FTC has more power than the FCC. The FTC can say to a company, hey, we're going to penalize you because they don't even need proof of the claim. If there's so much as a claim and the FTC dictates we think this is an unlawful business practice, they can sanction them. So by giving the power and oversight back to the FTC, I think we're doing a great service to consumers, the country, and businesses. By repealing the 2015 Open Internet Order, you're not just making it be the wild, wild west of the internet. I'm presenting...
May I respond?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, it cuts in and out on my Wi-Fi, so sometimes you're frozen, and I think you're taking a pause, so I try to speak. In terms of the data, do you think there's other factors that could influence that?
Other factors being?
There's tons. I mean, it's kind of like, for example, the vaccine debate. Autism's at a new record high. Sure, but there's other reasons for that besides vaccines.
Well, it's because autism is a spectrum now, and so like there's more people technically placed inside of the autism. But that's beside the point.
And the point is, correlation and causation are not the same thing.
Okay, so give me a factor in which you think was contributing to these numbers.
Do you think the economy could play a role in that?
Well, was the economy on an uptick in 2014? From where?
Sure, but I would say 2004 was pretty good. I would say the internet wasn't what it was back then as it was today.
I think
it's slightly different.
Not 2004.
In 2004?
I said 2014, not 4.
2014.
So from 2014 to 2016, under the Open Internet Order, investments in capital expenditures by the 12 major ISPs and some other small ones fell $3.5 billion. Do
you think that could be because of the economy?
You just admitted that the economy was on an uptick in 2014. I guess we would have to look
at 2004. Right? I thought you said 2004.
No, I didn't say 2004. I said 2004.
That was my fault. 2014, no. The economy still wasn't good.
It wasn't good, but it was not on an uptick from 2000.
Okay, 1% GDP growth is not an uptick. That's like weak.
Okay, so let's put this into perspective. Okay, so we can look at the overall economy and say there was other contributing factors. Sure, absolutely. I'm not naive enough to say no to that. Okay, I don't know what percent played a role in those factors causing, a $3.5 billion loss in investment and spending on infrastructure for your internet so you can have a better internet experience. All I'm saying is it has fallen, and these are the numbers, and a major component of that was the Open Internet Order because there was no competition to be had. There was no reason to go and spend your money on building new towers and building new networks and investing in the infrastructure because it's going to be so heavily regulated. Everything is equal. It doesn't matter.
Well, let me ask you this then. Okay?
Can I respond to that, please?
Let me make one point really quick because this is relevant to what he was saying, and then
May I respond after?
Yeah. We'll let Brian make his point after. I just want to say that in 1996, like I was saying before, through the Telecom Act, we gave billions of dollars in subsidies to the ISPs to upgrade infrastructure, and they did nothing. You can look it up. Nothing changed from 1996, and it didn't change, even though we gave billions of dollars. So it doesn't matter if there's a loss or if there's a gain. There was no infrastructure being changed anyway because the ISPs had no reason to do it because there's no competition. The only reason that they would have to upgrade their infrastructure is if there was competition in the market. And my personal opinion, okay, and I know you disagree with this, but this is my personal opinion, respectfully. I don't believe that if we were to repeal net neutrality and open up these, because there are benefits to repealing it. I agree with that. And my personal stance, I'll just put this out there, is that we keep net neutrality in place until more ISPs enter the market, and then we repeal it when there's more competition. But I'm not in favor full time. I just don't think I think we're repealing it very haphazardly before we have a solution in place to kind of replace it or fix it or anything like that.
May I respond?
Yeah,
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
almost on that point here. I don't believe that. I think that the reason you saw it in 1996 and you saw it in 2014 and 2016, the infrastructure isn't really going anywhere. That's because, in my opinion, this is a time when net neutrality was in place and when it wasn't. And I think the only conclusion we can draw from that is that these companies really have no motivation to upgrade infrastructure because there's not enough competition for them, right?
Okay,
And
Brian, go ahead. Brian, go ahead. Yeah, please. I do have something to say to Dylan, but Brian, please go ahead. I do want to hear what you have to say.
So real quick on terms of, before I get to kind of what Dylan was saying, even in that case, I'm a little not too convinced by the data because you can't really have a control in that situation, meaning there's other factors playing the role. I think the economy would be one. I think different competition arising could be one. And in terms of what Dylan was saying, I don't disagree. I think there's a time for government to be involved. I think there's a time for government not to be involved. It's not a matter of me liking regulation or liking big government. I like a smaller government and I like less regulation. But I also acknowledge that if those regulations do something good, then I'm willing to support it. And I kind of agree with Dylan in the sense that at some point, I agree, we could repeal it. However, I think we should be a little bit more cautious about when we do it and maybe do it when there's more providers available. And I do believe we would see more providers available if we didn't allow companies to hinder development of other, kind of up and coming providers, which is what I'm concerned about. I think we could actually repeal this and do it the right way sooner if we allow those companies to come about. So that's kind of my.
So you're not remaining neutral then. In that case, you're picking and choosing, saying, we want X amount of companies to get involved, and then we'll open it and let the floodgates go, and then we'll just see what happens. Now, real quick though, the common factor, because we want to talk about the factors that could potentially contribute to the investment loss and the capital expenditures loss. Dylan states the subsidies from the 96 Telecommunications Act. The common factor between the two, from the 96 Telecommunications Act until 2002 and 2014 until 2016, is what? Government regulation. So,
I don't. Well, that's the issue I was bringing up, is that I see that from 2014 to 2016, yes, they were losing money. There was the drain in the market. Number one, I mean, you could put in a bunch of factors. Brian brought up the economy. You could bring in a lot of other factors. You could bring up the changing market, because I agree. When it comes to things like technology, drastic changes all the time.
yes.
And even if the government were to regulate, I think it's very hard to do that because of how it changes all the time. Now, so there's a bunch of factors. What I'm talking about is they were given money in 1992.
Yes.
They lost money but either way, there was no infrastructure growth, even when they were given money to when they weren't. And I fundamentally do not trust large corporations to have the best interest of the people at heart. And this is something that Trump ran on, and this is something that Bernie ran on. And this is just kind of like the anti-establishment thing, is because I see these big companies making backroom deals with the government. And that's why I don't trust, when you say the FTC, and I'm just saying that I'll let you respond to this too, because I do want to hear your opinion on this. I don't necessarily trust the FTC in forcing these companies to be transparent, because I see with our politicians huge issue with payoffs behind the backdoor deals. I think that the repealing of net neutrality was a payoff, a backdoor deal between these big companies and the FCC. And so my concern is, because 80% of the country supported this thing, so the only reason I could see for repealing it would be that. But my concern is these large companies are going to start paying off investigators within the FTC to not, file a report against them or not go after them if they're not as transparent as they could be, just so long as these other companies are
slightly more vague.
So if Netflix and Comcast come to an agreement and they don't want to share that with the people, let's just say this hypothetically. I know that you don't agree with the hypotheticals, but I'm just saying this.
No, hypotheticals are okay, Dylan. It's just when your only argument for keeping something in place is a hypothetical, I kind of.
Well, I'm just using this as hypothetical. Let's say Netflix and Comcast come to an agreement and they say, okay, I'll pay more. Let's block out this competitor because it's mutually beneficial to us. We'll work more closely with you and we can block out the competitor. It'll work. Then the FTC comes in and says, hey, you're not supposed to do that. And they say, you know what? How about we give you guys some money? We'll help you. We'll fund, your politician that'll keep you in place. We'll fund their campaign. Whatever it is, we'll do that for you to help you kind of just push this under the rug. That's why I don't trust these large companies. Trust the companies. And I think with these repealed, you open the door to allow these big companies to take advantage of the small companies, and that's
censor info.
Okay. Yeah. So you don't trust the FTC to regulate and enforce because of potential backroom deals, but you trust the FCC to have 100% oversight. So once you repeal the once you repeal Open Internet Order of 2015, you have the FTC and the FCC, right? So now you're opening it up to different things. So if you try to bribe the FCC, right, and they say yes, but then you try to bribe the FTC and the FTC says, why are you trying to bribe me? Now this company is going to get caught. So I think that it's important, if you distrust government and big companies, the last thing you should want is only one government, agency watching, having 100% complete and total control, and ensuring we're just going to give trust to them that you guys are going to do what's right. So if you don't have trust in something, that's okay. It's totally all right. I don't necessarily trust the government either every day of my life, right? I mean, we know that there's hidden agendas and background things going on, and that's okay. But if you're concerned about the FTC taking a bribe from a bigger company, you should be 100% more concerned with the FCC taking a bribe from a bigger company when they have 100% regulatory oversight of ISPs.
Well, how do you feel about this solution? Let me ask you this. What if we were to designate cable companies as common carriers, and this would require them to allow internet service providers free access to cable lines, right? It's the same model used for dial-up internet. That would ensure that cable companies cannot screen, interrupt, or filter internet content without a court order. And the common carrier status would be give the FCC power to enforce the net neutrality rules. How do you feel about that solution?
Well, that's essentially what they did under Title II, was they regulated them as a public utility service common carrier.
Yeah,
right?
but
what's important to remember is on one basis, I can see where you guys are coming from, saying, hey, I don't trust these big companies to have the little guy in mind, and they're going to pay off a government. But then, two sentences before that, you'd say, I think that we should have oversight until there's other companies built up. Who do you think is going to pick those companies? So you don't think maybe there's some backroom deals going on with them until the government, we add more ISPs, more private ISPs. Who's picking those ISPs? Because right now it's regular. So to what extent does it end where the not conspiracy theories, but the fear of them not having your best interest in mind, where does it end? In my opinion, it ends by getting the government out of a free market capitalistic society, which is what ISPs do. And these smaller ISPs, if they can get the investment dollars, which they've been losing, irregardless of which factors caused it, they've been losing investment dollars. If they can open the doors once again to the free market, and another smaller ISP comes along and says, hey, we have this great new technology. Now they don't have to go to the FCC and get an approval. And if they get denied for the new technology by the FCC, there's no appeal process. So now they can get those investment dollars and potentially bring greater internet service to your area, right? Along with that being said, now we don't have a heavy burden tax on the internet, which the FCC under Title II, 2015 Open Internet Order, was a 19.6% tax. So you're having this heavy burdensome taxes that these smaller ISPs can't afford. A bigger ISP can. So by them oversighting and regulating it solely and making these heavy tax burdens and heavy regulations, smaller ISPs don't have the capital to compete. That's what I'm saying.
The same law. That's exactly what I was saying too, though, in regards to if we repeal the net neutrality laws, that now these companies are allowed to charge for certain services. So they could say to a smaller Netflix streaming competitor, you have to pay this certain amount of money for me to get the same amount of service at Netflix.
Yes, but that's never happened. Provide me, yeah, absolutely. But provide me one instance of them making you as of course, absolutely. Provide me one instance of them making you pay for a service for one instead of
for a little bit.
Okay, look, I can't name an example because the prices were never increased on us because of the deal made. But what I can do is cite, like Brian cited earlier, the Madison River Communications Company being fined $15,000 for restricting customers' access to Vonage, which was a competitor to them. And that's what and of course you said other examples. It's a specific court case. I don't have the exact numbers on the other one, so I don't want to bring certain examples.
There's 12.
And
I don't have the exact numbers and the amounts and fines and stuff like that, but I do for the.
You should get notes. You should get notes, Dylan. You talk down about it, but you should probably get some notes. They're very helpful. Brian, go ahead.
In regards to the laws of net neutrality. Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Yes. So kind of what we see now with, for example, like an AT&T, is if you bundle your package, you save money. And that's kind of what we see now is they're encouraging you to do that. Would you not throttle other companies if you could get away with it and prohibit other competing companies from competing with you and making their service worse? And the other thing I'm worried about is slowing down the speed for certain services based on things like political beliefs, which you could do that. Data doesn't have to be treated equal in that case. So if you disagree with a right-wing news source, you could absolutely slow down their service.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Facebook kind of shadow ban thing that we're having right now, where conservative accounts are being suppressed while, you know, the liberal accounts or other accounts aren't being. So what essentially what Brian's saying, you know, is like, why don't third party were to come in, say the government, and say you are no longer allowed to suppress these right-wing accounts, you know, suppress their hashtags, which they've openly admitted to doing to Grant. You can look it up. They suppress hashtags on Instagram. They've openly admitted that. So this company is openly admitting that it is suppressing the hashtag. There's no reason for them not to do it. What if the government were to come in and say you are no longer allowed to do that, treat all Instagram pages the same? Would you support that?
No.
You wouldn't?
No.
Why would you not support that?
Well, because they are a private entity, okay? And as a private entity, they reserve the right to do whatever business practice they want to do on their platform. That's different from, well, let me finish. So it's kind of like the Muslim bakers and the gay cakes. As a private business, I fully support someone saying, hey, you know what? No, I don't want to use your baker anymore because you don't want to bake me a cake. While we have the same opportunity to say, you know what? Since I disagree with you, I'm not going to use your platform. We know what's going on and we still run our pages. And there's a reason.
What if there were only 3 different bakeries you could go to and they all had that position? What if the 3 bakeries all had that same position and you couldn't go to 4 bakeries?
So if all 3 bakeries had that position, that's where free market capitalism kicks in. And someone says, you know what? You screwed me over. You screwed me over. You screwed me over. Fuck all 3 of you. I'm going to start my own damn bakery.
May I respond?
But when it's regulated, though, right? When it's regulated, there's nothing you can do, because what if we want to play what ifs? What if the government, so everyone's concerned about the ISPs charging different bundle packages or charging for different services or anything like that. Under an open and free capitalist market, you can say, screw you, I'm going to someone else. Now, what if we want to play what ifs? What if the FCC or the government decided, hey, every ISP needs to offer a bundle? Then what? Now you're screwed, because what other government are you going to go to? So I think it's shown that the free market works.
I agree that the free market works.
Brian, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
I don't feel a bakery is a very good analogy because I don't believe they're similar to providing internet service in any way. It's not very difficult to start a bakery, with all due respect. Obviously, it takes some know-how, but it's nothing most people can do. I disagree that's the case with internet provider services.
Okay.
Okay,
so you're saying that it's not a valid argument because it's different from having to have hundreds of millions or billions really of dollars to start an ISP.
I would say that given the vast difference between how those companies work, I would say it's somewhat of a false comparison, fellas.
Okay. So what if we bring it into perspective?
Can I have one other point, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. You don't have to ask. Just make your point.
Well, I didn't want you to think I was interrupting you. In terms of the religious part, I feel that's also somewhat different because you do have religious exemptions in those cases, kind of that we could talk about in terms of serving a gay couple. There are religious exemptions. But I think maybe another example would be kind of how we say, hey, you can't make black people, eat on the far side of, the trashy part of the restaurant. We said, hey, that's not right. You should treat them equally. So we did that. So I don't know if, even in that case, just because of the difference in businesses, they're not really compatible. But I don't believe in that particular case, businesses and owners do have religious exemptions. They do have the right to say, that goes against my religion, and I think it's wrong to force someone to do that. However, I don't think it's wrong to say, hey, regardless of what data they're paid for that data, they should be able to look at whatever they want.
Yeah.
Assuming it's legal. It's not like child porn, of course.
But that's the issue, and what we're getting into is that, I agree. I don't think that people, I agree with having fair business practices, and that's why the FTC has an oversight, and that's why they don't need proof in order to hammer down sanctions and fine a company, which in the 12 instances that we stated, I believe it was the FTC over 50% of the time fining those companies from 2004 until 2015. It wasn't the FCC. They would make a complaint to the FCC, and the FCC would then turn it over to the FTC, which I think is great because now we have checks and balances, right? So with that being said, though, in order to say it's not comparable to starting a bakery, yeah, sure, of course it's not a comparison to say I'm going to start a bakery compared to I'm going to start a multi-100-billion-dollar company. The issue that I have now is under the 2015 Open Internet Order, it makes it too damn hard for a smaller ISP to get that investment and get the funding and do that because they can't afford the tax burden. They can't afford the regulatory red tape. By the time they get approved, the technology advances so fast that it's going to be completely irrelevant. The government was designed to act slow in order for us, we the people, to monitor them so they can't just change something at the whim of their hat, and there's nothing we can do. So which is why it's beneficial to get them out as much as we can of regulating something that hundreds of millions of people use every single day in and day out, right? Because by the time, they're slow for a reason. So if they're regulating and we have these new technologies and advancements, you're only going to have the big, as what you guys call the big three, you're only going to have them forever. So there's multiple components to this discussion, but what the end result remains the same. Free market capitalism. Go ahead.
If I may respond, I don't believe the taxes that you brought up either, the taxes you brought up earlier, are necessarily the cause for businesses not popping up, especially if there's money to be made there. I think a much bigger cost would be, for example, throttling a company, for example, if a cable company that wants you to buy packages and wants their TV, throttling someone like Netflix or Amazon Prime, and basically slowing it down, hindering their business, and saying, what do you want to do to achieve the internet speed that you wanted? Sometimes referred to as fast lanes or slow lanes, stuff like that. I think that's far more destructive, preventing small businesses from popping up than a 19% tax.
When you get rid of here's how I see it, okay? If we were to get rid of the government and get rid of their kind of oversight regulation on this, then I think that the ISPs in and of themselves kind of become an interim government for internet service providers, because then they can start fining other companies freely, and that's kind of like a tax for other companies. A tax is essentially just a fine. It's called a tax from the government when it's a tax from the government, but if you were to get rid of the tax and then add the same amount of money just given from the internet service provider for these companies, it's essentially the same punishment. So even if we got rid of the government from it, and the ISP is like, yay, now we can set up these companies, but now the bigger ISPs are saying, no, now you have to pay the same amount as a tax, but it's just going to me instead of going to the government.
If I may add one other point to that real quick, a lot of these smaller companies also piggyback off of these bigger companies. You usually don't start off with your own server that you're using. You usually piggyback off a larger corporations, which makes it a little bit more dangerous.
I mean, the majority of the time they get bought out. We see mergers all the time, and it happens.
That as well.
Yeah,
but it would be like if we looked at the bakery analogy, if almost every single time bakers had to buy their bakery inside a giant building, and inside that building it was its own giant bakery, and because they lost money, they maybe prohibited traffic, maybe they blocked off where people could walk over there to slow them down. It wouldn't be right. So, and in terms of the taxes, I don't believe that taxes are necessarily what's hindering them. I don't believe that's the main factor at play here.
It's not the main factor, but it is a big contributing factor. Okay. Alongside with that, what I go back to, which you guys claim is irrelevant to the discussion, how you claim it's irrelevant is beyond me, is local governments are prohibiting smaller ISPs from competing in rural markets and trying to get in there. It's laying the wire in the foundation and infrastructure is the easiest part. The physical labor of it is the easiest part. It's getting approved through the government and the local government kickbacks. So what's really hurting—
Not because of the backroom deals I was talking about before, though.
Yeah, the kickbacks that local governments ask for from ISPs coming into their market. The smaller ISPs can't afford the kickbacks. They can't afford the wait like the bigger ones can. So by this happening, if there's an issue with a local government, right, suppressing a company who wants to come into that market because they can't afford the kickback that the local government wants, I fail to see how the solution to that problem is to have the bigger government regulate it and say, look, we're out here for the people, we're here for the consumers, we're just making sure everything's fair and balanced and everything is equal. Because we know damn well, and you guys have even admitted it throughout this discussion, that's not the case when it comes to the government. The government is not out there for the little guy.
But I would say that this isn't, I also kind of want to point out, one of our points are, this isn't your standard situation. It's not our standard bakery, which is why traditional economic thought isn't very applicable when you're dealing with a natural monopoly. Now, if we want to argue where the tax should be or how easy it should be for them to set them, that's somewhat of another debate, in my opinion.
It is perhaps debatable for it's relevant to bring economics into it, maybe not in the economics we think of, but it's relevant because smaller ISPs cannot afford to get into markets. They're losing dollars by the billions.
No, I agree. But also at the same time, these small companies that want to compete with the larger companies, say like Comcast streaming service or Netflix, they can't afford to pay the ISPs. So it's a catch-22. If you get rid of the regulations, then these smaller companies can't afford to do it because they can't afford to pay the ISPs to compete with Netflix streaming services, Comcast streaming services. If you keep the regulations, then the smaller ISPs can't afford to come in because now you've got this. So I think that the solution to this is to keep the rules that say, let's not allow these fast lanes, slow lanes. Let's let them treat everything equally, but let's get rid of tax. See, at the end of the day, the problem, like you're saying, one of the contributing factors, not the big problem, but the contributing factor is the tax. If we get rid of that and we just keep the laws in terms of saying you have to treat everybody the same, all data should be treated equally. This isn't people, this isn't communism, this is data. All data should be treated equally, like just one data bank, it should be treated equally. If we were to keep that rule, but get rid of the tax, I think it would work much more efficiently. And so I think it's a win-win for both sides of the equation there because you're keeping what we like and keeping what you guys like. I think it's a compromise.
If I may, you cut out quite a bit, so I'm not quite sure what Dylan said. But
oh, really?
I have bad connection right now.
Wait, did you hear me, Timothy?
I heard you.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure it was just
I did hear what he said earlier in regards to we shouldn't totally disregard economics, and perhaps I worded that wrong. I think it's not very relevant to bring up a case like a bakery where it's very easy to start one up and you have a lot of bakeries in town and you have a lot of different ways of receiving the goods and services you want. I don't think that's really a good comparison when you're dealing something with like internet providing services, which I don't believe are very similar. I don't believe you can apply the same sort of logic as you would to a bakery, as you would to internet providers.
Okay, may I? It's relevant because it's the free market. Okay, it may be different in terms of how much money or how complex what you have to do, but it's relevant because it comes down to the only solution that we have here is the free market. If, for instance, Comcast, or which we can all agree we're not too happy with the current providers that are out there. I mean, I think it's like 67% of Americans say they're dissatisfied with their internet providers, and that's okay. But it's relevant because in the free market, if Comcast and Xfinity start doing these things that you guys say you don't want them to do, the free market talks and speaks up and we drop them. There's a reason why none of the hypothetical, and this is why it's so important, and I stress to people that when the only argument you have for something is the hypothetical apocalyptic what if scenario, it's important to stress because there's a reason it hasn't happened before. There's a reason these companies who could at any day, we all know this, they're as you guys say, duopolies, at any day they could say, we're going to start bundling your internet. We're going to start charging for this. We're going to offer our service free, but theirs not free because it's ours and not theirs. There's a reason they've never done that prior to 2015. Why? Free market capitalism, not because the FTC, not because the FCC, but because the consumer has the power when you are in the free market. Once the government, any entity, to any degree, regulates something, the consumer loses out. But because right now the only choices you have is a big ISP, right, at a at normally high price, or you can pick these smaller ISPs with slower speeds. So what we do when we end the open internet order is we allow the businesses to compete, and what you're going to see is what we saw from 2002 to 2014 was better internet experience, competitive pricing, and I disagree with the whole we shouldn't be able to have paid prioritization, because paid prioritization can work either way. Okay, and if you want to use Netflix and Netflix wants to spend money to an ISP to ensure that, hey, we require so much bandwidth, let me pay you more money to be prioritized to all the ISPs. It's not just one. It's not just a streaming service picking and choosing, saying, hey, you, and the ISPs aren't dictating to this guys. The whole thing with Comcast and Netflix was Comcast was doing everything that there was mutual agreements and business as usual. But you're right, the internet does change. The technology does change very quickly. So they had to come to a compromise. That is why in the free market, Netflix and Comcast came to an agreement and compromise, and we haven't heard about it since. We didn't need net neutrality for that.
May I respond?
Yeah, of course.
Few points. So you came through a few points. Let me go through a few of them if I can remember all of them. The first one, in terms of whether it's relevant in the free market, and I still disagree that it is. It's kind of like how you brought up with the bakery. You said, well, if bakery 1 and 2 screws me over, fuck you, I'll start my own. I don't think that same logic applies to something like internet providers. It's kind of when I debate anarchist, I would say, you know, you're not really going to have certain functions that government provides. You're not going to be able to do it because the private market just doesn't provide that sort of thing. One being NASA. I think you could also argue the military would be severely underfunded in terms of defense. And I think it's somewhat similar with internet providing services. They tend to bring up things like, you know, somewhat simplistic markets and simplistic businesses. In all due respect, all businesses are somewhat complicated. But a bakery, relatively simplistic. It doesn't take a genius to run it. Something with like IPS, it's pretty different. It takes kind of a select group of people to do that, similar to the military. You know, if you want a missile defense system, I don't think the private market's really going to provide that just because people need it. So that would be my response to that point. In terms of the Netflix scenario that you brought up, my issue with that is Netflix paid for their portion. Netflix paid for what they were sending out. And the issue where it got clogged was, I forgot who it was. Was it Comcast?
Yeah.
From Comcast to the consumer. Well, that's not really Netflix's fault. They paid for their data. They paid for, it's less than, I think, 10 per second. They paid for theirs. The consumer paid to receive it. And I do believe it's a responsibility of that company that's playing the middleman to deliver on their services. And they ultimately did, but only after Netflix paid them a substantial amount of money, mostly because Comcast didn't want to compete with Netflix. Because at this point, Netflix isn't what it used to be in, you know, early 2000s, the mid 2000s. I remember I had it. You would order a DVD and it would come in the mail, right?
Yeah,
no one does that anymore.
Yeah,
everyone has Netflix. My friends that I all know, the generation coming up, they don't have cable. They have YouTube. They have Netflix. They have Amazon Prime. Cable's dying. Cable's at an all-time low. It's going to be moved out with some form of internet streaming service. And these cable companies are going to do whatever they can to maintain their monopoly because the market's saying, I don't like this. I don't like cable. It's dying. People don't want it. They're at all-time lows. And they're deciding, hey, I'll just use YouTube. I'll just use Netflix. It's way cheaper. I save a bunch of money. And in terms of the doomsday thing, I don't think it's really that bad to bring up hypothetical situations that will occur in the year 2018. And it's not done yet. It still has to go through Congress. But whenever it would go through, it's not going to be the same like it was in the mid-2000s. So I do believe it's okay to use hypothetical situations.
If I could make one point as well, just kind of going off what you said, you talked about the paid prioritization not inherently being a bad thing. And I agree if there was not going to be any competition. So if Netflix says, hey, I want to be able to provide faster speeds because we have so many people now, so I need to do that, let me pay you this money. What happens when a smaller company comes through, and even let's pretend like the ISP is fair and will let you, no matter, like if you want to pay the money, they'll give it to you regardless. The smaller company won't be able to pay that, so then there'd be no incentive for the consumer to go with the smaller company because they'll just keep going with Netflix because Netflix keeps paying and paying and paying because they can afford to faster and faster speeds. So the smaller company can't do it, so there'd be literally no incentive for people to go with the smaller company. Therefore, it would just die out in the free market, which I don't think is fair because then you're just monopolizing Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, things like that, who can afford to pay it, who have grown so rapidly, by the way, if you look at Netflix's numbers, I mean, it increased drastically during the time of net neutrality, so we don't really know what will happen afterwards. Because
I'd like to hear the numbers. Do you have those numbers?
Let me get those really quick. I looked at them. Anyway, I will say that now that we were to, a smaller company won't be able to grow number of people.
And what's wrong with, and what is wrong though with you keep saying I don't agree with that Netflix should be this huge giant and everything else. And it boggles my mind as to why. They came up with a great service. They perfected it. They did everything that they had to do. They spent their money. There was someone there who took a leap and took a chance and said, I have an idea, which is free market capitalism. They came out with a great service. They're reliable. They're being used more heavy. If someone wants to go in and try to compete with them, fine.
But fair though, because they can't do it. But here, I have the numbers for you right here. Okay. This is from Statistica.com. Number of Netflix streaming subscribers worldwide from third quarter of 2011 to third quarter of 2017 in millions. In 2011, it was in the third quarter of 2011, it was 22.93 million. In the third quarter of 2017, it was 109.25 million. So obviously, like a massive increase.
Now let's go into factors again, because you guys wanted to use factors. Is the only factor there? Tell me which contributing factors could have made those numbers jump from 22.9 million in 2011, quarter 3 out of 4, to in 2017, 109 million.
I'll tell you exactly why. It's because people are sick and tired of, number one, I mean, there's a lot of facts. Number one, I would say commercials played a big role. I would say people are unhappy with the cable companies where they are right now because they don't like that the cable companies, there's not very many to choose from. And so if you're unhappy, you can't really go anywhere else. So I think a lot of people are upset with the cable companies and they just keep merging. And it's a whole complicated system. And then they come and there's really bad customer service. They outsource. They don't want to spend money. These companies, call your cable company service. I bet you $100 you're going to get either a robot or you're going to get some person in India just like, hello, you're doing, and not be able to understand them. They don't want to spend money. Even though they're given billions of dollars from the government, they still don't want to spend money. So that plays a factor as well. Customer service sucks. The quality from that you're getting sucks. And it's just, and Netflix, they're providing, they say you pay this a monthly amount, nothing will be added. Where with these cable companies, they add stuff to your bundle. They say you have to start paying more if you want more stuff. Netflix says you pay this monthly amount, you get access to this selection of movies, this selection of shows. Even though Netflix has recently been taking shows off, kind of pissing me off, but it's fine. You provide a single payment and then you get access to this. And when it comes to your cable companies, there's a lot of shady work that goes on behind it, and people aren't happy, and there's not enough competition. So that's why Netflix has grown.
But here's where it's funny though, is that when it fits your guys' perspective, it's, there's so many factors. We can't really look at that because there's just so many different factors. No. When it kind of goes against it, it's, I mean, look at this. Netflix jumped from 22 in 2011.
No, I just explained why that happened, and I blamed the cable companies.
Okay, and here's why we see Disney merging with Fox, because they're starting their own streaming service in 2019. Okay, so now there's a competitor, a big league competitor to Netflix.
Yeah, but that's not how is that helping the little guy though? That's not the little guy wanting to start. That's Disney and Fox merging to start a streaming service. That isn't helping really the free market.
Yes, it is, because they know that they're losing cable subscribers in droves. Okay,
but they're just to make more money.
But what's coming, why it's relevant is because now if a smaller person wants to, they can get investment dollars. Right now, a smaller company cannot afford to. And we're kind of forgetting here, there's a reason that Google and Facebook, these huge giants, and you claim yourself, you don't like monopolies. Is Google a monopoly? I mean, you got Bing, you got some other thing. I remember when Ask Jeeves was competing with Google, right? So there's a reason why Google and Facebook are for net neutrality, as you guys call it. I call it the 2015 Open Internet. And that's because they're not regulated under Title II, because they're just a peer service. They're just a peer partnership. They're not an ISP that pays. They essentially get the same thing, but now they're not regulated. So now it makes even smaller companies who want to go into the market and compete against the likes of Google and things even hard with net neutrality. It makes it harder for someone to compete against Google. And you said to yourself, you don't like these big companies and you don't like big monopolies.
I actually disagree with that. There's been a massive turn towards the new search engine. It was like DuckDuckGo, or I can't remember what it was called, but
massive in comparison to Google. No.
Well, no, but if
I know
runs very efficiently.
but
All search engines use the same database. All search engines use the same database. It uses the same database. It doesn't matter if you use Bing. It doesn't matter if you use Google. It doesn't matter if you use.
okay, but what I'm telling you is, if you're for the little guy, and then why would you look at? There's a reason that there's Google and Facebook and every senator, Democratic senator, and all these people who say, no, we absolutely 100% need it. Do you think Google is for neutral competition? 100% no. You know why? Because in 1997, when they registered Google.com and they came out with an idea, they blew the competition out of the water. They kept innovating. They kept doing all of these things. I mean, if you want to look at statistics and everything, Google is huge. And there's a reason for that, because they don't fall under these same regulations that the ISPs will. Netflix doesn't fall under the same regulations that the ISPs will. So, the whole argument of, well, what if they start charging these? What if they start charging this? If you guys truly want data to be equal, then you would want every single thing to be regulated under what you want. But what you're missing and what people jump to is the internet service providers are these big, horrible people who, by the way, have spent like $300 billion on getting an infrastructure.
Yeah,
okay?
but they promised they were going to change the wiring. It's still copper almost everywhere. Like, it's not. They're
not money given to them. This is money spent. That you can't debate the fact that they've spent billions of dollars on their infrastructure.
In certain markets, I would argue that they don't spend it in markets where it matters. But here, we got to wrap up this debate here.
Can I make one point real quick?
Yeah, make a point, but then we're going to wrap up the debate. I think we've all made very valid points tonight. But Brian,
then I guess we can just give our closing statements.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I don't believe that we should treat something like IPS is the same way we would traditionally treat most businesses like we normally would. I think we have to treat it differently in terms of the issues with getting rid of net neutrality and just saying, well, you have to be honest. Well, we've seen stuff similar to that before. Verizon, they basically just said they were trying to test a new system, but I believe I can't remember who they were throttling. They throttled somebody. Another one was, I believe it was T-Mobile. Doing it. AT&T had the FaceTime issue, and they make up their excuses for it. And sure, they're being open and honest, but we all know that's simply not the case, which is why they should be punished. It's not fair. It's not right. In terms of Netflix, for the example, Netflix paid their part. They paid the agreed upon part. The consumer paid their agreed upon part. It's just I believe it was Comcast that needed to complete their end of the deal. And they didn't, and they should be held accountable for that. I believe it should be stricter than it would be otherwise if we got rid of net neutrality. So I do believe it's needed. I believe it's important. And yeah, I enjoyed this debate. I would love to have Timmy on again if we may. Maybe we could do a flat earth debate because I do enjoy those debates. So maybe we can come on again. We can have a flat earth debate if you're interested.
All right, go ahead. Closing statement.
Me?
Yeah, then I'll make mine.
Okay, so essentially what this comes down to is does net neutrality, the word, sound good? Yes. But is the 2015 open internet order good? No. I believe facts and figures substantiate my claim, and the only argument for having this regulatory oversight, which does not need to happen, is a hypothetical, apocalyptic, what-if scenario. What could go wrong that has absolutely no evidence to back the claim, while on the contrary, wanting a free market capitalist society when it comes to internet has been proven to work from 2002 until 2014. I think everyone who uses the internet can agree that the cost of the internet was competitive. The internet blew up. Everything was going up and up and up and up and up. A common argument I hear from people and proponents of the open internet order is, if it's not broke, don't fix it. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, it is broke under this current system, and prior to the 2015 open internet order, it was not broken. Very complex issue, lots of moving parts, lots of different things. What this comes down to is, do you believe in a free market capitalist society where consumers have the power, or do you believe that big government is the solution? And I think we've seen on very many cases, folks, that we cannot have our trust in big government, and we as consumers need to have the power in a free market system.
Before Dylan does his close, would you be interested in that debate?
Well, let's talk about it. Let's wait. We can talk about that after we finish.
Okay, go ahead and do your close.
I know what you're saying, but he's trying to discredit my opinion on something.
No, I'm generally
no. I just let's save it just for that reason.
There.
Let's just save it for that reason. Okay. So my closing statement is that this net neutrality debate has gone on not just within the internet, but in a lot of different areas. We've seen this with monopoly laws. We've seen this with laws against businesses, being monopolies and doing that. We don't like monopolies because when there's a monopoly, one company can increase the price as much as they want. It almost discourages free market activity. The whole point of the free market is that you have a vast amount of competition, lowers the prices of a product, and then you can get that product for cheaper. But if we only had, say, Walmart, the products wouldn't be that cheap. Also, I think at a certain point, I'm not pro-regulation that much, but I do think that at a certain point, a company so large becomes less about the people and more about the money and about the power. And I think when you've got these very large ISPs, it isn't so much about satisfying the single person. If they cared about that, they'd have better customer service, they'd have better, quality, products, everything like that. But instead, it's becoming people, like you said, upset with their internet service providers, and that is because there's no incentive for them. They only care about the money at this point. And when there's not enough competition, they don't have to care about the people. You start off caring about the people. You start off individually caring about each individual person. And then once you get so large, you don't have to do it anymore. I use Facebook as an example. They do not have a customer service phone number. And I have had trouble with my Instagram account before. You can't get a hold of Facebook support. You have to email them. You have to wait days because there's not enough competition to Facebook to have them care. All they care about is the money. So at a certain point, regulation is important because these big companies, and we've seen it over and over again, Trump has talked about this, they will start taking advantage of the people to make money because it doesn't matter if the people like them or not. There's just not enough competition. Now, when it comes to the apocalyptic scenarios, and I know that's come up a lot, and I said this in my video I made about net neutrality the day it was repealed by the. I cannot say, for example, what will happen. I can't do it. But what I can say is what these companies are allowed to do, and I can make predictions based on that. So it would be, for example, like if we were going to pass a law, let Obamacare, when it was passed in 2009. Everybody was saying it's going to collapse, it's going to collapse, it's going to collapse. Everybody said, don't make these apocalyptic scenarios about Obamacare. The Democrats were saying that all over the place. Well, Obamacare collapsed. And everybody was saying that before, but because we hadn't gotten to that point yet, it didn't happen, but people could see into the future. So all I'm saying is that I can't guarantee to you that this is going to happen, that these things that we've been talking about on this debate are going to happen. But what I can say is that these companies are now allowed to do that. And if you trust these companies, which 67% of the population doesn't, then go ahead and put your trust in these companies that you already hate. But if you don't trust these companies, then we need some sort of regulation in the way. Anyway, that is it today, ladies and gentlemen. I know we had a little bit of kind of a rough time.
I really wanted to hit you on that Obamacare analogy.
I know, but I'm just trying to
wrap it up. Oh boy, I was close, but I said okay.
I know, I saw you. But anyway, thank you guys so much for tuning in. And this debate. Put your guys' arguments, comments, concerns, anything down below. And we will definitely take a look at those. I'm sure we'll all be coming back and responding to comments. So if you comment something pro net neutrality, Timothy can respond to you. If you comment something, I can. If you comment something,
you respond to folks. I'm going to respond to everybody. Okay.
We're going to delete comments we don't like, though.
Yeah, we will delete comments. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye bye.